Okay, now there is a bit to get through. I'd like to keep this as participatory as possible. So really happy for people to stop, ask questions. I love it when we're able to benefit from the experiences and learnings of others. So please don't treat me as the expert here today. I've got a lot of content to share with you, but I'm sure that there's a lot of experiences and learnings to share from everyone on the line today. So really happy for people to pipe up and share your own examples and insights into evaluation planning. So my name's Stacey. I'm the Executive Director here at QCOSS, or the Queensland Council Social Service for Workforce Planning and Sector Development, which is a really exciting piece of work because my team and I get to have fantastic conversations with the community services sector across Queensland all of the time about the needs that you have in the work that you do. As well as addressing workforce related challenges. So it's a really exciting space to be in. And I wanted to mention that because if you do have ideas around that or gaps that you've noticed or things that you would really like to see from QCOSS, very happy for you to get in touch at any time. Or did that pop up for everyone else? 1 second, I've got something on my screen popping up and I don't know why. Okay, I've gotten rid of it. Sorry about that. Now, I'm just going to make sure, yeah, okay, we've got everyone on mute. Of course, I think we're all well practiced at this now. If you're not on mute, we'll be able to hear you. Happy for you to take yourself on mute if you'd like to ask a question or make a contribution of some kind. But if you're not speaking, to have yourself on mute for the webinar would be fantastic. Okay. Now, I'm on the lands of the Yagara and Turrbal people today. That's where I do most of my work because I'm in Brisbane in West End. So I like to pay my respects and acknowledge their elders past and present and acknowledge their continuing connection to this place, the really rich culture and contribution they make to our community here. I'd like to pay my respects and acknowledge the Yungabear speaking nation because it's on their land that I raised my family. If you would like to acknowledge the land that you're on, I encourage you to do so in the chat. All right, so as we get started, I know that participating in webinars is a little different to being in a room with others. So it's really nice to be able to orient ourselves and find out who else is in the room, even though we're not physically with one another. So I'd love for a few of you to share who you are, the organisation that you work for, if you do, and the role that you have with that organisation, and what you're hoping to get from today's webinar. Happy for you to take yourself off mute to do that or to do that in the chat. Jess, you kind of kicked us off. You already said who you're working with. So I will start with you. What are you hoping to get from today's webinar?
Well, I've never done any applications for grants before at all, and I've just come from a child protection background predominantly, so this is the first time I've really moved into a community development role where I would be in a space to do something like this. So just trying to upskill and advance, I suppose, knowing that writing grants is potentially a part of my role later on down the line.
Thank you. What about others? All right, well, if you would like to share who you are and what you're hoping to get from today, please let us know in the chat. This webinar specifically, we worked with the Department of Communities to speak about the content and what they were noticing in some of the applications that they were receiving. So many, as you know, government departments are putting out grants and tenders all of the time for organisations or businesses to be responding to. And there's always some things in the evaluations that could, in the tenders that could be improved. And so we've been talking to them about what their contract managers have been noticing in the tenders that they're receiving. And one thing that they had noticed is that the program logic and evaluation aspect of applications is something that could be strengthened. And that's really our purpose today. It's to help organisations understand a little more about how they approach evaluation. Now, often when we think about evaluation, it can be quite a big thing to be tackling, and for a small grant, sometimes organisations will think that's not something that they really need to be thinking about. But what we're going to be talking today is not just about how you measure the impact you might have had at the end of your project, but how you can draw logic between what you would like to achieve and the activities that you propose that you do, so that you're really set up for success right from the beginning of your project. And so that funders can see a really clear delineation between what you're proposing you'd like to do and the purpose for which they've put the funding out. They would like to see a really clear a line to be drawn between those. Okay, I'm just letting a couple of extras in. Welcome, everyone. Okay, so this is the outline of the things that we're going to be talking to today. So a Grants in Australia research study in 2018 showed that grants make up $80 billion of the Australian economy. And funders have informed QCOSS many times that many applications can lack critical detail, including solid evaluation plans. And that's really what we're trying to bolster today. So a grant example we are using today is the Communities Innovation Fund, which responds to social isolation and loneliness. But the principles are really broadly applicable. I can just hear that someone's off mute. Sorry to that person. I'm just going to mute you. Okay, so we're going to be talking about program logic. We're going to be talking about developing a program logic, an introduction to evaluation, using program logic to improve your project and evaluation planning, how you do collect evidence and how it is used to support future funding applications. And that's a really critical aspect of delving into grants and tender writing, is that every time you evaluate a program you do, it gives you critical information you need to bolster the next funding application you might be putting together. So it's a very important part, not only of ensuring that your program was successful or you've garnered really critical learnings for next time you do it, but that you've set your organisation up for successful applications in the future. We're also going to be talking about how you bring it all together and how you put that into your tender writing. And as I mentioned, though I will refer to the Communities Innovation Fund, which does respond to social isolation and loneliness, all the things we talk about today will be absolutely applicable to any funding application that you might be putting together. So we often talk to organisations about Skilling Queenslanders for Work. These principles can absolutely be used across applications. Okay, so another common term for this concept of program logic can include theory of change. So some of you may have heard the term theory of change and program logic. They are often used interchangeably, and we'll talk a little bit more about what that looks like. So has anyone used a program logic or theory of change process before? No. Okay, I can see Jess shaking her head. Would anyone like to talk about their experiences of using a program logic or theory of change? All right, that's okay, because I've got some things to share. You might have been exposed to a process where you've planned a project with a view to achieve particular outcomes. I think we've all been exposed to that process where your organisation has particular funding to achieve something, and you as a team or as an organisation have had to think about how you would achieve that, what things you're going to do to have that particular outcome. And that's, in a nutshell, what a program logic is. It's having a structured process to ensure that the things you are going to do, the activities or outputs, are actually things that would lead to the change that you would like to see. So it's a visual representation of how your program activities, your outputs, will lead to your intended outcomes. And sometimes, though that seems like a very simple thing, there is often disconnect between what we would like to see happen and the activities that we do. So this process makes sure we clearly step it through. And so I've seen a really clever picture before, and I don't have it on the screen now, but I'll try my best to describe it. And it's someone writing on a whiteboard or a blackboard their project plan. So we're going to do all of these things, and then And then some magic will happen, and then we'll have this output or this outcome, sorry. And so sometimes we do make some assumptions about the magic that is going to just happen in the middle to lead to the outcome that we want to see. Stepping through a program logic ensures that we're not counting on any magic to happen, but we actually do know that things we're going to do will lead to that outcome. So it's a program planning and evaluation tool. It supports effective planning, including highlighting your assumptions and potential issues that you may not have identified if you hadn't done this process. And it helps identify key questions for effective evaluation. It's important to know that it can be amended during implementation, but it should be fully developed before the program starts. And ideally, you're thinking about this when you're actually putting together your funding idea, because your funder wants to be able to see very clearly that you have thought through all of these actions to get to the outcome that you're seeking funding for. Okay. So what are program logic components? Let's talk about what makes up a program logic. And it's important to know that different formats do exist, but they usually include these common elements that are on the screen now. There's a problem statement. It's a clear, simple description of the issue. So, for example, if you are applying for the Communities Innovation Fund and you are looking to address social isolation, your problem statement might be something like this. It might be, new mothers in our community feel really isolated when they have a baby because there is currently no parent support groups available. It might be something like that. Your inputs are what you're going to be putting into the program. So one thing might be the funding grant that you're seeking. And then you will have other inputs because, as many community organisations know, we don't just leverage from funding itself, but we often have partnerships. We have our own organisational assets that we put into programs. Output. What are you actually going to deliver? So what are the things that will come out of the program? And then your outcomes, which is your desired results. So depending on the level of project, I've done project logics where we have 5 or even 10-year outcomes that we're looking at. But for a shorter term project, obviously you're looking something more like 6 to 12 months. It really depends on the size of the project, but you will have short-term, medium-term and long-term outcomes that you will be mapping out for your project. So, for example, a short-term one might be increased hours of social contact across duration of the program. So we need to be really realistic. Someone engaging in a 6-month program, it's probably not going to change their entire life, but they may have increased hours of social contact across the duration of the program. After 6 months, they might report that they've got increased social connectedness. In long term, maybe in 5 years' time, if they continue to engage, you will be able to map some reduced social isolation scores. So that's just an example of medium to long-term outcomes that you might see from a project. Any questions there? Is that really clear? Great. Okay, so let's have a look at how we develop the project logic components. So for your problem statement, what you're really asking yourself is, what are we trying to address here? What's the actual problem that we would like to address through the program we'd like to deliver? Who's affected? So in the example I used before, it was new mums who've had a baby. What's causing or contributing to the problem? In my example, it was that currently there are no parenting groups that exist in our community. So we move to inputs. What are we going to invest? So one thing is your grant that you're seeking, possibly. What will our partners invest? Oh, well, you know, we partner with a hospitality college and they provide morning teas for our program. They're going to be providing morning teas. What else is needed and how will we get it? Do we need to partner with someone else? Is there a gap here in the resourcing? It might be that you need a space, and so you need to partner with an organisation that has a suitable space for the thing that you would like to host. There's all kinds of different ways that you might be gaining inputs for the program you want to deliver. Now, moving to outputs. what will we actually do? So the example in my head of the addressing social isolation for new mums, it might be a series of weekly morning tea play groups that your organisation hosts. That's free for new mothers to come, and in that program, you might have different guests come to the morning teas to talk about different things, or we might have a range of activities that those mums can engage in to assist them to create connections with other parents. What will participants be doing in the program? That's what you're really asking yourself when you get to outputs. And then outcomes. What effect will our outputs have? Because of course, we want to be delivering programs that have a real impact, that actually do address the problem we're trying to fix. So what changes will we see? If we were successful in reducing the social isolation of new mums in our community, what would we see? How would we evaluate it? How would we measure it? And that's a really important thing to think about when you're proposing a program, is how would you measure the effects of it? How would you show your funder that you did what you said you were going to do? And doing that well, as I've mentioned earlier, really sets your organisation up for success in the future, because you will have a really robust evaluation, which will articulate how well your organisation can have an impact, and it really gives you some great gold for putting into your next funding application. So it's well worth putting a great amount of effort into the evaluation of any program that you're delivering. So I'm going to give a brief example here of the Community Innovation Fund, which is the one that we're using as our example in this webinar today. So the Communities Innovation Fund has grants of up to $200,000 a year to combat social isolation and loneliness. Some of you may have applied for this in the previous round. The proposed program must be targeted and innovative, and applicants must demonstrate a clear program rationale. So when they say that they mean a program logic, they mean a clear line between what you're wanting to do and the impact that they would like you to have, that you can achieve the target outcomes. So you need a solid program logic that demonstrates how outcomes will be, too soon, sorry, that will demonstrate how outcomes will be achieved. And with any funding application that you're putting together, and certainly any that I've ever worked on, that's a really clear ask from funders. Funders are often using public money for the tenders and grants that they're administrating, and they need to be confident that they are giving money to organisations who do understand what the link is between what they want to do and what the purpose of the funding. So for the Communities Innovation Fund, it could look like this. Your problem statement is the evidence that you've got in your community for isolation or loneliness in your target group. So you might be using survey data, you might be using client reports that your organisation already has. You would have some kind of problem statement about what you would like to achieve in your own community. The inputs are your staff who would be working on the program, volunteers that your organisation might engage, the funding itself, material resources and spaces. You might have a meeting room, you might have, I know when we talk about Skilling Queensland's work, some organisations, you have a minibus and they use that in their program logic. Like, that's an asset we can use, that's an input that we have for this. Or research, so intelligence that you have to put into the program. Now, your outputs would be the group sessions, it would be the activities you're delivering. It would be the referrals provided, it would be skill building processes. And ultimately then the outcomes that you would hope to see after doing those things would be reduced loneliness. So it could be self-reported, increased social connections and increased community engagement. You would need to write about that in your evaluation. So really, program logic is kind of a fancy term, isn't it, for showing how proposed activities will lead to intended program outcomes. If you work through the steps for developing a program logic, you will find that this really helps you identify potential weaknesses or problems to be solved that you can solve in advance, that Otherwise, it could have compromised your project. So sometimes you might, if you don't step through this process, you might find when you're actually partway through your project that something's not quite right. Actually, we're kind of missing a step here. If we don't do this part here, we're not actually going to get the outcome that we're seeking. So it's really important to step through, even if it's a small project, how you're actually going to meet the impact that you would like to see. So do involve multiple stakeholders. Use your team, your current client group. You might chat to them about co-designing what it would look like. A community representative if you're seeking the input of people, the kinds of people you'd actually like to see engaging in the program. Learn from previous program delivery. And again, I really can't emphasize enough the importance of evaluating your program so that you can learn from them and input that into your plans for your next project. And a SWOT analysis, the strengths, weaknesses, opportunities, threats. That process can be really useful for figuring out what might be missing from the process, what might not work as well as you think it will, what's fallen over before and might need a different idea. And another thing you can do is backcasting, and that means working back from the desired outcomes to the outputs and the inputs. So sometimes you will have, and this is often the case actually when people are developing a program logic, you will have your problem that you'd like to solve and the outcome you'd like to see. And you don't actually know what's in the middle yet. And you have to work back from the outcome you'd like to see. So if we want to see new mothers thriving, connected to one another, feeling like they're part of a village that are really helping them to raise their children, what kind of activities would we do to help that? And that's where you might then be able to actually come up with your ideas for what the outputs look like. So this can really help you get started in developing a program logic. This is not the full process. This is only intended to show you the starting point, really. So you would write your problem statement really clearly and state the problem that the program is intended to address. Then you would identify the intended outcomes of the program. And then you work backwards. So you're identifying what steps, what activities, what outputs you would need to do to meet each outcome. And single outcomes will often have multiple steps. So hopefully that's clear to you. You don't always need to, sometimes it's not actually, that you know exactly what program you want to be delivering. Sometimes it's all you know is that you've identified a problem in your community that you would like to solve and you think you're well suited to solving as an organisation. You know what you'd like to see. And this process really just helps you step out what possible inputs and outputs could actually lead to that for you. Okay, so are there clear links between your proposed outputs and your outcomes? Do the outcomes, address the problem or the contributors to the problem? Now, particularly with small tenders or grants, obviously we're not solving enormous problems in our communities with small grants, but you may be able to address contributors to the problem. Absolutely. You may be able to address barriers that people have to having social connections with other people in your community, for example. Now, you might be able to identify potential links and problems. So, for example, a program that provides vouchers to offset the cost of healthcare in a community where there aren't enough healthcare providers to meet demand, that output isn't going to address the core problem, is it? Doesn't matter how many vouchers you give people because the providers aren't there. So that's an example of where a great idea that might suit somewhere else, you will identify through stepping through a program logic that output is not going to lead to the outcome we're seeking. It sounds good on paper and it might work in another community, but it's not going to work here. If we give people vouchers, but there's not enough providers, there's a disconnect there between the outputs we're proposing and the outcome we'd like to see. So I'm going to make a link here between meaningful evaluation and the program logic, because the evaluation considers the inputs, outputs, and outcomes and whether or not it all worked and to what extent it worked. I'm sure you can all think of quite a few suggestions for methods of evaluation and ways that your organisations currently evaluate the work that you do. Now, evaluation is essential for determining whether or not a program is worthwhile and provides evidence that we can support further applications. And that's the case for small tenders and grants, but it's absolutely the case for most of the core work that you would be delivering in the community services sector. So most of you, I imagine, would be involved to some extent in evaluating the work of your organisation. You would have client or service user feedback. You would have metrics or numbers that you gather through the work that you do, how many services you provide, how many people access your services, all of those kinds of things. So when we're evaluating our inputs, so what we put into the project, the key questions you might be asking are, what were the actual inputs? And that's where your finances come into play. How much work or volunteer time was invested? What did we say we were going to do and what did we actually do as far as hours go? How much did we spend? That's a really important one, particularly if we want to make sure that we're setting our organisations up for financial sustainability, is ensuring that the budgets we put together for the projects we deliver are adequate. And that's not just dollars, but also our time. What organisational resources did we end up using? Did you end up partway through the program wanting to print a whole heap of workbooks that you hadn't budgeted for example? What community, or did you say that you were going to use the minibus, but you forgot to budget for the fuel that you'd be using in it, perhaps? And what community resources did you use? Were the inputs appropriate? Were they adequate? Did we shortchange ourselves, or did we actually completely overestimate what we needed in one part of the budget? What differences did we find between planned and actual inputs? And what did we learn about probable inputs for future programs? So if we were to do this again, what would we like to take with us into the next proposal? So when we're evaluating our outputs, these are some of the questions you might ask yourself. Who were our participants? How many did we have? How did they engage? We might have thought that one part of our program was going to be really popular, but actually we really struggled to get anyone to engage with it. And actually this other part over here that we didn't think was going to be that exciting was the bit that everyone wanted to engage with, for example. What activities, events, and sessions did we deliver? What were the attendance or engagement rates? How many people actually came? How many people, another question might be, if you're running a series, how many people came repeatedly, or were people engaging in one-off sessions? Like, what does that look like? Were the outputs appropriate, relevant, accessible? What did you learn about them as you went along? Did you realise perhaps actually you had people with disability in your community that wanted to come along and participate, but what you'd set up wasn't necessarily going to be easy for them to navigate? Were there other learnings you had about accessibility? What feedback did you receive? And that's really important. I'm sure you have multiple methods for doing that in your current work. And what did we learn about the outputs that can help us better plan for future programs? And now this is the really big one. This is evaluating the outcomes. What changes did participants experience? Were these changes caused or influenced by the program? And how can you tell? How do you know it was your program that did it and not something else that they were doing? And sometimes that's not completely clear cut. Please, I don't want to oversimplify that. Sometimes it's not. Sometimes you'll be able to say, look, we saw these positive changes and we think we had some, or we know we had some contribution to that because of these things. But it's absolutely not all clear cut to be able to decide how much of an impact you had for some particular factor. How do the outcomes compare with our desired or anticipated outcomes? Did we go beyond what we thought we were going to achieve, or did we not quite meet the mark, and why? What unexpected outcomes did we see? And what have we learned that can inform future program planning? And I think you can see, if you evaluated if we went back to the previous two slides, if you have evaluated your inputs and you've evaluated your outputs along the way, you're then, before you even get to this evaluating the actual outcomes, identifying things that may have either positively or negatively affected the final outcome. For example, if you're evaluating your inputs, and in there, you've identified that you had drastically under-resourced the staffing hours needed. When you get to evaluating your outcomes, you can talk about, hey, actually, a lot of this was because, remember, we were under-resourced and we weren't actually able to do the thing that we thought we could do. So really breaking it down to evaluating the inputs, outputs, and the outcomes can really assist with that final evaluation. Hi, question. Please go ahead. Oh, I can't hear anything, I'm sorry. Jenna, would you like to put your question in the chat if you're not able to use your microphone? I'll come back to you as soon as I can. Your microphone doesn't seem to be quite working, I'm sorry. With all the advancements in technology, these microphones let us down a lot, don't they? Okay, so I want to just, while you're just managing that, Gianna, I want to go back to unintended outcomes, because these often come up for us in programs, and they can be positive or negative. Things that happened that we just didn't realise that they were going to be happening as a result of the program. So a positive unintended outcome might be engagement with social activities that lead to physical health improvements. Oh, we started a dance group, and it was about addressing social isolation and making connections, but actually another thing that our participants reported was that they had increased physical health. That might be something that you identify through the evaluation process. It wasn't something, improving physical health wasn't something that you had set out to do, but it's just something that happened because of it. There's also negative unintended outcomes that can happen sometimes. So an example, in a program that's trying to address social isolation, an inaccessible location left potential participants with disabilities feeling more isolated. So that's something, you obviously did not set out with that intention at all of actually increasing anyone's isolation, but unintentionally, because of the lack of accessibility, that's what happened. So it's really important to think about unintended impacts as well. Yes, thank you for your question, Jenna. So Jenna's question is, and I hope I'm saying your name correctly, what about when outcomes are tricky to evaluate? So for example, a social media campaign to encourage people to get cervical screening. You can measure who it reached, but not if they then followed through with that. That is a really good question. Thank you for asking. And I think it's a common challenge, particularly in the work that we all do, to try and evaluate the impact that we have. And, our team at QCOSS is often asking ourselves similar questions about how we can measure the impact that we have in things like sector development work. For example, at the end of this webinar, I'm going to put a poll up, which is going to ask you about how useful this webinar was to you. And so I'm going to get some measurement today from you about the usefulness and what impact it might have on your work. But long term, I'm not sure if you're going to apply for a tender and whether or not the information you heard today is going to help you be successful in gaining that tender. So that's an example similar to what the example you're providing there is. There are limits to what we're able to measure. There are limits to what we're resourced to measure. So I could potentially follow up with every single one of you in a year's time, and then in 2 years' time, and in 5 years' time, and ask you about how many tenders you've written and how often you use this program logic and evaluation information in the tenders that you use. So potentially, yes, I mean, it's possible, but do I have the resourcing to do that? No, I don't. And so it's really important for us to be realistic about what we have the resources to measure. And funders know that too. So they know if they're giving a $50,000 grant for something, there's only so much measurement and evaluation that can be done with that. And that's something to really keep in mind. Now, and it absolutely depends too on what kind of activity you're delivering. So yes, social media is, there's metrics you can measure as far as how many people click on something, but how would you measure if anyone followed up with it? That's a tricky one, because I don't know much about how the ins and outs of trying to gain the contact details of people who are possibly using social media. I don't have any suggestions specifically on how to do that, but there would certainly be people out there who would have some ideas about how you might be able to do that. You could even do, depending on who you were promoting the social media messaging to, possibly do a survey asking if people had noticed the ads and if they had done anything as a follow-up. But I'm wondering if anyone on the line has any suggestions about that. I do have one suggestion for you, Gianna, and that's we have a webinar coming up with the Research and Evaluation Network, and I can see Amy's on the line, and at the end of this session we'll share some information about that, but that will go into more depth about how organisations can evaluate their work. But I really appreciate the question, because it's a really important one. It is very tricky, particularly when we come to social outcomes, to evaluate them. And of course the Communities Innovation Fund is a relatively smaller a grant, so you're not going to be expected as an organisation to deliver a really comprehensive evaluation, and they do actually give you a scale that you're meant to be using. But yeah, that's right. Jess has suggested maybe it was targeted locally. You could ask the clinic to record numbers and see if there was an increase. Fantastic suggestion. Thanks, Jess. Sometimes it does take interagency input to be able to evaluate some things. I think the important thing to note there, though, and you really highlighted, Gianna, that it's important to think about this before you start the program. If you leave thinking about evaluation until the end of delivering something, you can potentially get yourself into a real pickle with not having thought into how you're actually realistically going to do that. So you may have promised a funder, oh, we're going to achieve this and we're going to achieve that, and when it comes down to reconciling your funding and putting in your final report, you may find it really difficult to actually evidence what it was that you did. Okay, so your overall evaluation, has the problem statement changed? Is it still relevant to the participant group or for the broader community? Was the problem addressed by the program? If so, how? How do we know that? If not, what can we learn from it? We did this thing. It did not have the outcome we thought it was going to do. Why? Did the outcomes justify the investment of resources? That's something that funders are interested in. Depending on how much money you've gotten, do they think that a suitable amount of people benefited from it? Are there ways the problem could be better addressed? And are there ways that the program could be improved? And there's nearly always a way that the program can be improved. Okay, gathering evidence. So it's really important to note that evaluating inputs, it's really important in the overall evaluation of your program. So key questions to ask here is the activity, programs and reports. We're asking about how many events were actually invested in, the use of staff and volunteers, including their worker hours. That's a really important thing to be tracking, because if you're going to apply for a similar funding again, you want to make sure that what we put in as far as hours were accurate. Oops, go back there. you may be able to use things like, you will be able to use your financial reports. That's a really important one. And you often do need to submit audited financial reports for some funding. You'll also need to be able to look at things like meeting minutes, any organisational data or records that help you keep track of the input that your organisation had. But certainly, you know, things like timesheets, or your organisation might have a way that you really map the hours that people are spending on particular projects. That's really important. So evaluating your outputs. Obviously, it's not too hard to track how many sessions you host, if that's the kind of thing you're doing, how many you did, how often they were, what the attendance were at those engagements. They're fairly simple things to be tracking. You might then also have things like participant or stakeholder feedbacks or reports. You might be doing little mini interviews with people. You might have a form that you use at the end of sessions. But you can also use things like staff or volunteer observations and reports, reflections at the end of each session. You might have different ways that you keep track of how the program is going. Evaluating your outcomes. So measures and methods you might be using here is pre and post program surveys. If you are delivering a program under the Communities Innovation Fund, you have to use the UCLA loneliness scale. So in some ways that makes it, you know, you have some great guidance there. You don't need to be figuring out what measurement tool you're going to be using. They've let you know, if you are applying for this funding, that you need to use that loneliness scale. Some organisations would be using participant feedback questionnaires, and you know, obviously this really depends on the cohort you're engaging with and what is going to be workable for them. You know, I've spoken to some youth services that have things like QR codes that young people can then use their phone to scan them, and they can do it on their phone. Good old paper and pen might be suitable for some, but doing it with service users or participants may be also suitable. Totally depends on who you're working with and what you're doing. You might have participant interviews or focus groups. We have many times facilitated those to evaluate how things are going. And that might be suitable for the group that you're working with as an actual conversation. And you might have observed behaviour changes. Participants, their families, staff and other service providers may notice relevant changes that you were able to use as part of your evaluation. So initial problem, so it's important to include the program and project reports and integrating evaluation into reports. This is really valuable. Your funders who gave the initial funding really want to see the outcome of the program that you have delivered. So program logic would be really useful, useful context for the funder to be able to see that, and would be a good thing to be including in a final report. If you had developed one, definitely include that. A record of your inputs, outputs and outcomes. Really important to lay those out clearly. Risks, problems and unexpected factors and how they were managed. That's a really important thing to include in a final report. We set out to deliver this, and then the cyclone happened and we had to rearrange this, or we had to change the program a bit because the building we were going to use was damaged. That's just all the kinds of things that you might actually be addressing in that final report. Feedback from internal and external stakeholders, so staff or volunteers, participants, funders, community representatives, partners, etc., gathering their feedback about how the program is successful or how it could be improved. So in your evaluation of all areas, it's a collection of the measurement and the methods that you used for key questions and evidence to inform future planning and applications. And this, again, I'm going to say it again, it will sound a bit like a broken record, but it's so important to keep record of your successes and your learnings as an organisation and put that into your next funding application. And a summary of the overall evaluation is great at the end of that report to have a bit of a summary of your final reflections. We think this program well, this program was successful because of these factors. Next time we would improve this at this, or with further investment, we could bolster this aspect of the program, whatever it is, but a summary at the end there, really to say your final thoughts about the program. And learnings and plans for improvement are really valuable as well. So I've got a question here. So output would be how many sessions, and outcome would be asking if people would feel more connected following the session. Absolutely, you've got it. That's right. Okay, bringing it all together. So we've talked about how mapping out program logic highlights key areas for evaluation. We've got a clear problem description as a baseline for measuring outcomes and overall effectiveness. Everyone is really clear about the problem that we're trying to solve. Expected inputs or resource use, and we've got outputs or activities. And then we've got our desired outcomes to compare with actual or observed outcomes. And an evaluation provides opportunities to improve future program planning, and it provides evidence to support further funding applications. So your program or project report provides evidence of your ability to achieve desirable outcomes, to appropriately plan, implement and evaluate programs, to manage grant funds and reporting responsibilities, and to critically reflect and continuously improve. These are all things that assessors or funders take really seriously. So they're things that you want to be really clear about. And if you do these things well, you absolutely do establish confidence with funders, and you will find that you will gain more and more success. So use data to illustrate points, your number of participants, your completion rates, your satisfaction or self-reported measures. Describe the effectiveness of the resources that you used. Get feedback from internal and external stakeholders, and use that evaluation and those learnings and plans for improvement. So it's really important at the end of an organisation, at the end of a program, and it often happens that when you finish a program, you're like, oh, that was a lot of work, and you finally got that final report in. It's really a good idea as an organisation to pause and have a bit of a reflection on the project. Would we apply for that again? What would we do if we did apply for it again? What would we change? Would we work with that partner organisation again, or would we seek a different kind of partnership? What did and didn't work? All those kinds of things, while they're fresh in your team's mind, it's really beneficial to have a debrief internally about how you think the program went. So these are some examples of how you might articulate your evaluation. So, sorry, how you could articulate your capability for future applications. So, for example, experience managing grants or funding. So a lot of funding applications will ask about your capacity to manage. You could say we fully acquitted however much money grant, providing, and talk about the project that you delivered. You could talk about the engagement and satisfaction. 17 of the 21 registered participants completed with an average 4 out of 5 satisfaction rating. When you're talking about the outcomes, on average, loneliness scores reduced by however many percent, and social connections increased by however many percent among our participants. Talking about your ability to develop and manage partnerships is critically important in the community services sector. Organisations rarely do things alone. The effectiveness of our partnership with M&O Social Enterprise is demonstrated by the attached letters of support from their manager and consumer reference group. That's an example of how you'll be able to evidence the success of that. As a result, we propose a hybrid model, in-person and online delivery, to effectively engage. There you go. You can see where I'm getting at there. How you would build in this evaluation into the report itself and how you would write about it. Okay, there we go. 10 minutes early, just in case anyone has any questions or comments to make, anything that someone would like to discuss. And thanks so much for your questions, Gianna. Great. Amy's just put in the chat, and I was hoping she would. A registration link for the next research and evaluation network, which is all about a framework for evaluation in the human and community services sector. I do recommend you, if evaluation is something and the use of data is something that you would like to dive into more, we do have plenty of resources available to help you do that, not only through the networks, but through existing information that we have on the website. When we send you the post-event email, there's going to be quite a few. Let me stop sharing my screen. Oh. No, I can't figure out how to do that. No, I'm not sure. I've lost my ability to do that. Oh, here it is. Oh, the big red cross. There we go. Oh, after all this time, I should know where that is, but I lost it. Okay, so yes, the post-event email is going to have links to the activity that Amy's just put up, but as a few other things as well that we'll talk about. So we have a great grant on a page resource that helps you map out your project idea. We'll include that in the post-event email. We also have yes, Belinda, we will send the slides out. We also have a great webinar coming up that is all about how to use data in your application. And we know that everyone is in agreement that evidence-based funding and proposals is a good thing. But for many of us, data can be really daunting, and actually finding the data and how to use it in your application can be a really tricky thing. So we do actually have a webinar coming up that will go through how to use data in your funding applications. Now, the context, just like today, we use the Communities Innovation Fund as our example. The context that we use for that particular webinar is Skilling Queenslanders for Work. So we do look at a different funding opportunity. But again, like today, the information that we share is absolutely relevant across funding opportunities, and you will definitely be able to take many things from that to help you in any of the applications that you're putting together. So the link for that will be included in the post-event email. But what I'll do while I've got your attention is oh, thanks, Amy. I was just about to do that. Amy, thanks, has just put it in the chat too. So if that's something that you are interested in, Amy is actually going to be one of the people leading that webinar. Amy's got some fantastic skills in data analytics and how to present data. And if you go onto the QCOSS website, you may even find a community data dashboard that's relevant to you and the region that you're living in. So I do recommend checking out the QCOSS website, because we have quite a bit of information there that's useful. Yes, so what I'm going to do now, talking about evaluation, is going to launch a poll up on the screen. I do hope you let me know how you found the session today, because that helps me improve for next time. It should be up on your screen now. I really appreciate it. And if you do have any questions, please don't hesitate to get in touch. Our team is always really keen to hear from services, and any gaps you've noticed in your own skill development, things that you would like to see QCOSS offering, very happy to chat with you at any time about that. I hope to see you at another event soon.